Now that we've had a chance to play around with a project in Element, in this chapter we're going to look at a big picture overview of the workflow in Element. It is, after all, a little unconventional. So in this movie, we'll just look at a big picture overview, and then we'll get a little bit more specific in the next few movies in this chapter. Let's go ahead and come down to the Create a New Composition button here at the bottom of the project panel. Create a new composition using the HDTV 720-29.97 preset. I'll go ahead and click OK. I'm going to right click and I'm going to choose New Solid. I'm going to make this the size of the comp and click OK. Doesn't matter what color it is. And we'll go ahead and apply element to this solid. Now, in most cases, you're going to want to go straight for the scene setup button. However, if you are using custom materials, which we'll talk about later, or if you're creating your own 3D objects from a custom text layer or from a mask, which again we'll talk about later also, then you start here. But other than that, you'll want to come straight to the Scene Setup button to open the Scene interface. And this is where you'll do a lot of the, at least the initial setup in Element. And so then we come over here to the Model Browser, and we can go and click on one of these folders if we have them, and click to add a 3D element into our scene. So I clicked on alarm clock, and now the alarm clock is in our scene. Here in the scene area in the element interface, we have the model, that's the alarm clock, and then we assign it a group. We could really have as many 3D objects as we want in a scene, but to have individual control over each element, we'll need to assign them a group, and there's only 5 groups. So essentially for every instance of the element effect, you could have 5 independent groups of 3D objects. And once they're on a group, you really don't have too much control. So probably best to constrain yourself to use 1 3D object for each group. That's 5 groups total. Now here below the 3D object, we have the different textures applied to the object. So when we apply a 3D object, it's essentially just a naked model, and it looks shiny or like it has clock hands or whatever because of the different textures applied. We can, of course, let's say, for example, I'll click on main here, come down to the presets area, and maybe I'll change this to a flat color. You can just drag and drop that on top of the main texture, and that changes it. Or I could click on black hole and drag and drop, and that changes that. We'll, of course, talk much more about each of these steps later, but this is just the general workflow. We open this up, this interface, we apply the 3D objects, we clothe it in the material that we want. We could adjust things like the environment and lights, which we'll talk about later. And once we get that set up, then we click OK, and we could come back here and we open up the corresponding group to adjust the 3D model. So our 3D model here is on group 1. So I'd open up group 1, and here we actually have a particle replicator which creates multiple instances of our object. So if I wanted to create multiple clocks, I can increase the number of particles. I could increase or change the array. So for example, the current replicator shape is point. I could change this to sphere, making a sphere of 7 clocks. And of course, I could play around with this. I could scale the shape up and down, and I could rotate these and do any one of a number of cool changes. We could pilot a camera around the scene, whatever we want to do. And then we could animate these, adjust all the different groups. We could also animate between different groups. And that's a pretty cool trick we'll talk about later. And then we come down to the render settings and the output, and we add some finishing touches to make everything look beautiful. So that is the overall workflow of Element 3D in a nutshell. And again, as we go out throughout this course, we're going to be getting much more specific in detail about each little step so we can perfect every little piece of the puzzle.